It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back to Podcast by George. She's back, Laura Belin, Bleeding Heartland. God, I love having her on the show. And I'll tell you what, I get a lot of compliments. A lot of people like Laura on the show because she's got a lot of great investigative journalism, obviously. Also extremely articulate for somebody that's working in the print format. I got to extend some kudos there. I mean, she can talk on air. So that's all good. And I got to admit, some of my viewers like Laura because she's reporting on Kim Reynolds a lot. And a lot of people are into this Democrats, I hate all Republicans, Republicans, I hate all Democrats, kind of into this party thing. But there's much more to this, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But first of all, Laura, welcome back to a podcast by George.
Oh, thanks, George. Always a pleasure.
Well, I'm going to super up right away the website address for bleedingheartland.com. Encourage everybody to go there because you're not just going to see Kim Reynolds on the bleedingheartland.com website. I mean, everything in the state of Iowa is there. It's a community blog. There are a lot of writers with a lot of different topics, and Laura covers a lot of different things. But she's really been dogged in following the situation with Kim Reynolds and her handling of the coronavirus and statistics and close downs and mask mandates or the lack of same here in the state of Iowa. And I don't know, Laura, maybe you can correct me a little bit, but here's the take that I've had. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, and maybe I'm giving Kim Reynolds too much credit, but people look at this and they wonder, how in the hell can Kim Reynolds do this in the state of Iowa? And I look at it and say, well, yeah, she's a Trump supporter. And they say, well, perfect example. How can she be a Trump supporter? And I say, well, she's a supply sider. She's a Reaganite. She's a dyed-in-the-wool Republican going back to when I was in the news business with Reagan, which I talk about all the time. But these people actually do believe that first and foremost, you take care of big corporations. You take care of capitalism in America. You make sure that the top is well taken care of, and all the rest of us will be okay. We'll sort it out. Maybe even we'll figure it out on our own because they believe in individual independence. People like me, I'm a demand side person. I believe, no, that's not the way that it works at all. Like I kind of, think about FDR and John Kennedy and the heroes of my time. I think you help the people. You put the money at the top, at the bottom. You encourage them. You incentivize them. You actually reward them, and that money will circulate. It will work its way to the top, and it will benefit the people at the top. But Kim Reynolds has been running this balancing act in the state of Iowa, and it's been clearly on the side of keeping these businesses open, and it's to the detriment of people's health. And that starts our first story here, and it has to do with your most recent reporting on these statistics that a lot of people follow on a daily basis in Iowa. And you've been shouting from the rooftops for months now that these stats are not correct. Give us the latest.
Well, I mean, the good news is that at least the statistics on how many Iowans have died of coronavirus are now much more accurate than they ever have been on the website. They changed their reporting method earlier this month. This is something that I had been sounding the alarm about for quite a while.
Yes.
And shortly before Thanksgiving, I published a big piece about how you could just tell by looking at the CDC's website for Iowa and looking at the state website that we were missing a lot of the coronavirus deaths. And they changed that. It was kind of funny. They announced a quickie press conference, a video press conference on a Monday evening. Normally, every time they make a major change to the website, they announce it at one of the governor's televised press conferences. Well, this time it was not televised. It was by invitation only. I did not get an invitation, even though I've been covering this issue for months. And so it was invited journalists with the Iowa Department of Public Health interim director, and she explained that they were making this change. And at the time, they can't resist lowballing everything. So they said, well, this is going to increase. It's going to have a net increase of about 175 deaths. Well, no, it was really more like 600. That was where, compared to where we had been reporting and where we're reporting now. So the good news is that now, at least when you look at that coronavirus.iowa.gov page for the deaths dashboard, you can get reasonably accurate numbers going back, up to about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Now, there's a lot more delays to the reporting process now because of some things related to the CDC. And so you won't have any idea really how many people died in the last week, but you can go back at least now and look and see that we lost over 1,400 people just in the month of November. So we were losing on average about 48 Iowans a day in November. And it's just a staggering number of people. So that is a change that they made in early December. And as they've continued to update the website, it's a little bit erratic, the updating, but now we can start to see at least the human scale. And it is just massive. I mean, most weeks now, we are losing more people than we're losing to like cancer and heart disease, which are typically the biggest killers of Iowans and of Americans generally.
The scale of the deaths across the country this year compared to just last year, they've done that. And if you hear this, yeah, they're dying in huge numbers, a much higher percentage of deaths. COVID is a real thing. It couldn't be more real. And my question again goes back to, okay, Kim Reynolds has been dispensing what I call grape Kool-Aid here the entire year. And people say, well, why? I mean, is she a psychopath? Is she a sociopath? Does she want people to die? Why would she do this? And I say, no, she wants to keep from panicking people when it comes to patronizing these businesses. And I look at it and I say, well, yeah, but if you're dead, you can't go to the mall. I mean, if you're laying if you're on your side on a ventilator in the hospital, you can't patronize your local businesses. So that's the kind of tenuous balancing act that she's been involved in. And I guess it would be your assessment that this has largely been a fail.
It's been an absolute failure. I mean, look at it. Iowa is not a densely populated state. Iowa had a lot of advantages coming into this pandemic. We're not densely populated. We don't have a lot of travel and tourism. A lot of the states that were hit hard very early are big travel destinations and places with very densely populated cities where a lot of people are taking public transit. And so if you look at the deaths in the March, April, May timeframe, they were very concentrated in some cities or states on the coast, and also Illinois and Detroit. Part of that was because of the international airports they have there. So we had a lot of lead time, and it really never had to be as bad as it got in Iowa. And the fact that we have now moved up to 12th overall for per capita deaths, that's deaths adjusted to our population. And most of the states that are ahead of us, again, are these states that were hit very early before they even had time to put any mitigation in place. So Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, those kind of states. Only of the states that weren't hit early, only North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota Mississippi rather, are in worse shape than Iowa when it comes to how many people have died relative to our population. So we just should never be in this situation. And I think that Kim Reynolds, the problem she has, I wouldn't say that she's acted with deliberate malice, but I would say it's like malign neglect. I mean, it's been obvious. The experts were warning for months. The experts were warning in the spring. We were setting ourselves up for a huge second wave that would be very deadly in the fall if we didn't get this community transmission under control. And she's kind of locked into this idea that normalcy is important and balance is important. These are words that she uses very frequently at her press conference. Balanced approach, and we can do this safely and responsibly, and we can get back to some sense of normalcy. And the problem is that she's really just kicked the can down the road, because if we had better measures early on to reduce the transmission, then we wouldn't be in as bad shape now. And I think that we should have been using these state surplus funds. Shovel that money at the businesses, close indoor dining, tell restaurants they can do takeout and delivery, give a bunch of money to restaurants to keep their employees on the payroll, close the bars, give a bunch of money to the bar owners on the stipulation that they keep their employees on the payroll, and just keep things going, because we're losing a lot of businesses anyway. And we're facilitating these huge outbreaks. I mean, it just, unfortunately, I miss going out to eat. I like going out to eat for lunch or for dinner, but it's just not a safe practice right now. Until we get this virus more under control, people should not be eating and drinking indoors with people who don't live in their household. That's just the bottom line.
Well, and of course, me being the old lefty, I take it a step further and say, give the people some money. I mean, give it to them so that they can spend some money in those restaurants. We're looking at getting $600 here. That might take the family of four out to eat a time or two. But of course, you won't be paying your rent. You won't be paying your bills with that amount of money. So you might be sitting on the street corner with your suitcases, but you'll have spent a little money on local businesses. Well, let me go to this next kind of element of it, which is the insult to injury, because the state has responded like this. This is the injury. The insult is they won't report these numbers right, that the stats have been wrong, that they've been screwed up. I mean, at least do that part of it, but no. And so Dr. Andrew Nish was on my podcast here a week ago, and he's gotten to the point to where he doesn't even look at those stats any longer. Now, you look at them all the time. So do you have any advice for my viewers that want to see what's actually happening? Can they look at the state's dashboard? Can they look at these statistics and figure out something like you have?
I mostly look at the hospitalizations and deaths anymore. I really don't pay a lot of attention to the case and testing numbers because the testing numbers are not very reliable. And I really don't pay attention to the positivity rates very much because the way the state calculates the positivity rate is not accurate. And almost any other source that you look at will give you a higher positivity rate for Iowa. That's the number of positive tests compared to total tests. I think hospitalization numbers are harder to game. So, I mean, I do think that that's meaningful. Hospitalizations are a little bit less than half of where they were at the peak in mid-November. And that's encouraging. That should mean, because typically surges in cases lead to surges in hospitalizations, which lead to surges in deaths. So we should be coming into a period of slightly fewer deaths per day because of the lower rate of hospitalizations. But remember, at the very worst point in May of our first peak, we lost 20 Iowans in a single day. We've lost 20 Iowans, more than 20 a day, every day since late October. I mean, there hasn't been a day since like October 28th that we had fewer than 20 Iowans die of this virus. So it's a real disaster. And we might be somewhat on a downward slope, but I just don't know. And the testing numbers on the website, I still just don't really trust those. But the hospitals do seem to be less overcrowded than they were. One thing you don't know about that is that I think a lot of the hospitals are trying to give people treatments, outpatient treatments more now to preserve their resources. So like it could be that somebody showing up at the hospital who's sent home now with oxygen, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, a person in that same condition would have been admitted. So that is something that's a little bit hard to interpret. But I do think that the state dashboard numbers are fairly meaningful for hospitalizations and deaths.
Yeah, name of this episode might be insult to injury, because I want to go to the next insult on top of this injury. And we've talked about this, you've reported on it before, but the governor has taken it upon herself to use some of this CARES Act money that came down the line to reward her staff. This Dr. Padati got a huge raise. People have been well taken care of. They're in that very close-knit group around the governor. But you had some reporting here recently that not so much for the rest of state employees.
Yeah, well, the negotiations are ongoing, but, the state has to negotiate with the various unions that represent most of the state employees every 2 years, or in some cases every 3 years. But usually it's a 2-year contract period. And they're just coming up on the negotiating period for the next state contract that's going to start on July 1st of 2021. And the opening bid for the state government, and this is something the governor decides on what the opening offer is zero raise for 2 years, both years of the next contract. And, it's just, no one in the governor's office has gone 2 years without a raise. They always it's not a huge raise. They haven't gotten a huge raises like what Dr. Padati received, the state medical director, but they can rely on every single year at the beginning of the new fiscal year, they get a little raise, and everyone in state government should get at least some raise. Many of them have been working extremely long hours this year, longer than ever in their careers.
In a pandemic.
And the state, the bargaining law, the Republicans basically shredded public employee collective bargaining rights in 2017. So really, unfortunately, under the new law, the absolute maximum raise you could give them would be 3% a year, which really isn't, in a lot of cases, depending on where you live, might not even be enough to keep up with the cost of living increases. But 3% is what the AFSCME, which is the largest public sector union, that's what they asked for, a 3% raise. And they knew they weren't going to get a 3% raise, but that was their opening bid. The state's opening bid for most employees, about 18 or 19,000 employees, is zero raise. Now, they did offer, they're negotiating separately with a police union that represents some of the law enforcement in the state, and they offered them a very generous 0.5% raise.
Oh, God. And this takes us back to kind of where I started with this, because you look at that and go, my God, how can this be? I can't stand this Kim Reynolds. Is she trying to deny an honest living to these people? No. It goes much further, folks. This goes again back to Ronald Reagan. It seems to me like this is a public union. I mean, she's trying to, this is the heart of republicanism in America. I tell people, if you want to know what they really hate, man, it's unions. Why? Because of that capitalism model that we talked about. They do not want you being taken care of and relying on your union. They want you being taken care of and relying on the corporations, on the oligarchy, as they refer to it. Man, they would like to scrub these unions from the face of the earth. So she rewards her office, but doesn't reward these. I think it's all about the fact that they're just union members.
I think that's a large part of it. And the sad thing is that in some ways, it hurts the Republicans' districts more, the areas represented by Republicans, because the Des Moines area, I mean, there are a lot of good private sector jobs in the Des Moines area. Yeah, but you go into some of these county seat towns, areas in the state that have been losing population, that are somewhat in economic decline. And really the best jobs are working for the county, working for a school district, working for the public hospital. Those are some of the best jobs, and they're union jobs. That's one of the reasons they have, relatively speaking, they have good benefits. They have reasonable pay. It's not high pay. I mean, government work is not highly paid compared to a lot of private sector. But so the Republicans, instead of rewarding, I mean, who's going to go to the diners and the hardware stores and, the other small businesses in these small towns if you're screwing over the people who are working for the county or working for the schools? I mean, these people need to be getting a living wage and benefits. And instead, what Republicans have done is they've pointed at the unions and they've said, well, look, these people have such generous benefits. You don't have, how come they should have so much more, generous benefits than you have? And the truth is that over many years, the unions gave up a lot in pay to get some of the generous benefits. Well, now they can't negotiate over the benefits. That's not even something that they're allowed to bargain over. Yeah. So the state has just unilaterally increased how much they pay for health care and done some other things that are not good for their benefits packages. And a lot of people are really worried about what's going to happen to the public pensions. I mean, I think that's going to be something I'm watching for in the next legislative session, because that's more than 300,000 Iowans are invested in Iowa's biggest pension system. And you just know the Republicans, a lot of them would love to privatize that.
Well, you're worried and I'm worried about, the bigger picture even in our country, because these things have gone beyond political differences in our society. These are akin to what I think are almost religious fervors. I mean, you get you're hoping that Christians will become Muslims and Muslims will become Christians. Nah, it ain't gonna. We got two sides here, folks. And this two-party system, such as it is probably not going to improve on things. I don't know how it's going to happen unless we can break free of this. I just saw some reporting today that 50% of polled people believe that Trump's presidency was a failure. But the other, it's just 50%. The rest of them, man, they're sitting there waiting, hoping that they can bring Trump or somebody like him back to power in 2024. And they're not going to be dissuaded. They're not going to change. They're not going to look at the stories that Laura and I are talking about and change their political voting patterns. We're stuck in this for a while, I think.
Well, the scary thing is that if Trump were just a little bit more competent and had more of an attention span, he would have been reelected. I mean, think about the House Democrats passed a big second COVID relief bill in May that included a lot of money, like $3 trillion. And it would have included more direct payments to people. If Mitch McConnell hadn't just sat on that in the Senate, if they had passed something like that and Trump had gone out and taken credit for putting more money in people's pockets, he could have won. this election. I
know
mean,
it.
you know, he lost. I mean, 7 million votes is a lot to lose by nationally, but if you look at just some of the key states that he lost, it was only a few 100,000 votes. And so I mean, the irony is that they should have been more populist. They should have been more focused on getting money to people at the bottom. I mean, that would have been, and as you say, that's what the money that people will go out and spend right away, and it'll cycle back within the economy.
Yeah, and why doesn't he do that? Again, I think he's drunk on the same grape Kool-Aid, and if you wonder what I'm talking about, look up grape Kool-Aid on Google, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But Trump, really, he's a big believer in that too. I mean, you reward the top, you watch the stock market in particular, and you don't do anything that would endanger that, because the entire system and everybody in it will suffer if that stock market declines. The other thing Trump could have done was provide at least temporary health care, Medicare for all. He even talked about that a little bit during the pandemic. Again, that might have resulted in his reelection, but I couldn't do that, because that would alienate a lot of those big backers and donors in the healthcare insurance industry and all that kind of stuff. So that never happened either. Well, we're out of time. I've talked a little bit more of my philosophy than normal, Laura. What else is top of mind here? What do you want to talk about as we get ready to wrap up?
Oh, well, I mean, I appreciate the readers who will follow me into the weeds on some of this stuff. And I'm still digging on the overtime pay, bonuses, the use of the CARES Act funds. I mean, there's a lot. I would call it a target-rich environment. So I'm not done digging, and I hope to learn more early next year.
Next year, 2021. Let's hope it all gets better, folks. 2020 is, oh my God, what a year. But it was... ironically, a good year for Podcast by George and the podcast, Lori, and you've been a big part of that. Really appreciate you helping out in 2020, and I am looking forward to 2021 and many more reports from Bleeding Heartland. And go to bleedingheartland.com and sign up and become a patron on patreon.com and support what Laura's doing, because we wouldn't know a lot of this stuff if not for her. And I tell people this: if you want to know what's going on in the state of Iowa in the governor's office, go to the reporter that's purposely excluded from those news conferences we're talking about, and that's Laura Belin. I got to congratulate you on that, Laura. If I was excluded from participating in the governor's news conference, I would start my podcast off that way. Each and every episode would be now Podcast by George and the one reporter that cannot attend Governor Kim Reynolds' news conferences. This is great stuff. Thanks again, Laura Belin.
Thank you for having me on, George.
And that's going to wrap it up. That's going to do it, folks. If you like Podcast by George, as I always say, hit the subscribe button here if you see that on the video on YouTube and Facebook. Go to iTunes. Go to podcastbygeorge.com. Pick the badge, the little icon where you would like to be notified of each podcast when it releases, and you'll never miss a single one. But that's it. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another Podcast by George.